Everyone talks about elves with their songs and starlight. Men get the glory, the kingdoms and the crowns. But the dwarves, they get forgotten, buried beneath their own mountains, like myths sealed in stone. And that is a tragedy. Because what if I told you that the dwarves shaped Middle-earth more than any other race? That behind every shimmering sword, every fallen king, every whisper of gold, there was a dwarf with calloused hands, a broken heart, and a legacy no dragon could burn. This isn't the version you'll find in movie monologues or dusty appendices. No, this is the untold saga. The raw, powerful, occasionally scandalous tale of the 7 houses of the dwarves. From secret origins and legendary crafts to betrayal, exile, redemption, and wars that shook the roots of the world. You'll discover how a people born in silence became the loudest echoes in Middle-earth's history. You'll see the fall of proud kingdoms, the rise of reluctant heroes, and the fire that refused to go out, no matter how deep the darkness. So if you've ever felt like the underdog, the forgotten one, or the builder behind someone else's spotlight, stay with me, because the truth about the dwarves might just be the story you never knew you needed. They weren't part of the original plan, you know. The dwarves came into being not by Ilúvatar's will, but by Ole's restless heart, a craftsman who couldn't wait for the firstborn. Like someone sketching blueprints before permission is granted, Ole shaped them in secret, out of stone, with strength, grit, and that ever-burning hunger for mastery. It was passion, not rebellion. And isn't that a reminder? Sometimes the most enduring legacies are born from the boldness to begin before the world says go. Ilúvatar could have destroyed them. Poof, gone like dust in the forge's wind. But he didn't. Why? Because he saw something deeper, potential, perseverance, and yes, pain. He gave them true life, but added a condition. They would not awaken before the elves. That waiting period shaped the dwarves' very essence. They became survivors, not starters. Always stepping into a world already moving, always carving their place into foundations others laid. Each dwarf clan began with a father, 7 in total. Ole placed them across Middle-earth like seeds, though only Durin was alone. Durin the Deathless, the most legendary of all, opened his eyes beneath Mount Gundabad. Imagine waking up for the first time surrounded by stone, silence, and stars. No chatter, no guidance, just destiny staring back at you in the echoes. That's the kind of solitude that shapes a legend and teaches you to listen when there's no voice but your own. The dwarves didn't inherit a homeland. They built it, stone by stone, mine by mine. While others waited for elves or men to teach them speech or civilization, the dwarves already had Khazad-dûm, crafted by Auli himself. Their tongue was secretive, sacred, and shared only with kin. That's a powerful lesson in today's noisy world. When something is truly yours, protect it. Not everything needs to be marketed, translated, or explained. And yet, for all their secrecy, the dwarves were never mere shadows. They were makers, movers, and molders of Middle-earth. From their very beginning, they were meant to endure, to outlast. They weren't designed for comfort, but for legacy. You can see this blueprint even in modern life. The most resilient. People often weren't part of the original plan either. They were shaped in adversity, and then came the mountains. They say Durin looked into a mirror-like lake and saw a crown of stars above his head. Not metaphorically, literally. That vision wasn't a poetic illusion, it was a calling. Right then, beneath the peaks of the misty mountains, he founded Khazad-dûm. It wasn't just a city, it was the heartbeat of dwarven pride. Picture a realm carved in stone and starlight, where every hallway echoed with purpose and every anvil sang with history. Durin didn't just build a kingdom, he birthed a legacy. His descendants, known as the Longbeards or Durin's folk, took that flame and ran with it, deep into the roots of mountains. Khazad-dûm became the envy of Middle-earth, not for its gold or mithril alone, but for its relentless pursuit of excellence. These weren't miners, they were visionaries with pickaxes. Want a real-world example? Think of Renaissance artisans or modern engineers who blend function and beauty, people who don't just do a job, but master a craft. Over time, as all great dynasties do, they expanded. The Longbeards spread to the Grey Mountains, Iron Hills, and beyond. But they didn't scatter. They branched like veins of silver through rock. Even when they faced dragons, cold wastelands, or bitter wars, their bond remained unbroken. That's the thing about a real legacy. It isn't where you are, it's what you carry. Even today, you'll meet families or entrepreneurs with that same spirit. They build, they rebuild, and they keep the name alive. But Khazad-dûm wasn't eternal. Darkness crept in, quiet, slow, relentless, and with it came the Balrog, the flame shadow from a forgotten age. The dwarves dug too deep, some say. Maybe, or maybe ambition always carries a cost. Still, even after Khazad-dûm fell, its myth only grew stronger. Like ancient ruins we visit today, not because they still stand, but because of what they once were. Because they whisper of what's possible. And as we follow this line, Durin's line, we realize something. Greatness doesn't mean being undefeated. It means being remembered. And that's exactly what the Western dwarves carried in their bones as they chiseled new strongholds in the Blue Mountains. While Durin's folk were busy building beneath the misty mountains out west, another chapter was unfolding. The Firebeards and Broadbeams carved out their homes in the Blue Mountains, Belegost and Nogrod, twin bastions of power and craft. These weren't mere outposts, they were the anvil and hammer of dwarven innovation. If Khazad-dûm was the heart, Belegost and Nogrod were the hands, shaping history one forge-fire at a time. And make no mistake, their influence reached far beyond their halls. It was the dwarves of these western strongholds who partnered with the elves of Doriath to shape wonders. They helped carve the 1,000 caves of Menegroth, working side by side with the Sindar. Think about that. Two entirely different worlds, stone and starlight, coming together in harmony. It's the same magic you find today when unlikely collaborations happen. An architect working with a coder, a sculptor co-creating with AI. True mastery often begins where differences meet. But these dwarves weren't just builders, they were warriors. When Morgoth unleashed Glaurung, the first dragon and furnace of ruin, it was the Belegost dwarves who stood their ground. Azargal, their lord, faced the beast with a courage that burned brighter than fire. He died, yes, but not before striking a wound that even the dragon couldn't forget. That moment echoes the bravery of those who face what seems impossible and still act. It's not about winning, it's about leaving a mark. Firebeards and Broadbeams were also master smiths, shaping weapons and armor that became legends in their own right. Their craft wasn't ornamental, it was purposeful, enchanted and enduring. They remind us that beauty and utility don't have to be opposites. In fact, when forged together, they often outlast kingdoms. Whether you're designing a brand, a business, or your own legacy, always aim to build something that's both stunning and solid. Yet for all their greatness, something darker began to stir in the mountains. A moment of greed, betrayal, and bloodshed was about to shatter the fragile balance. Because even among the dwarves, those resilient sons of stone, not all treasures are blessings. Nogrod, once a jewel in the crown of dwarven craftsmanship, became a name whispered with both awe and sorrow. It was there that Telchar, the legendary smith, forged blades that echoed across ages. Narsil, the sword that would one day cut the ring from Sauron's hand, had its origin in that very forge. But alongside masterpieces came mistakes, and one, in particular, would forever stain Nogrod's legacy. Because sometimes, when beauty and power collide, greed finds a way in. The Noglamir was more than a necklace. It was a paradox, a thing of unbearable beauty, housing a Silmaril, one of the purest creations in all of Middle-earth. The elves desired it. The dwarves had shaped it. And when King Thingol delayed payment for its making, a fatal tension ignited. The dwarves of Nogrod killed him in cold blood, not out of evil, but out of pride, possession, and the illusion that their hands could claim what their hearts could not understand. It's easy to judge them until we look closer. How often does modern ambition turn sour the same way? Think of startup founders clashing over equity, creatives broken apart by who owns the final vision, or siblings dividing over inheritance. The dwarves of Nogrod remind us, even the noblest creators must be vigilant of ego. The greatest masterpiece becomes a curse the moment it blinds you to the cost of your actions. And yet, their genius cannot be denied. Telchar didn't just forge. Nazil he made Angrist, the blade that cut a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. These weren't ordinary tools, they were extensions of will, purpose hardened in steel. That's the lesson hidden in their tragedy. Our creations can shape history, far beyond our lifetime, but will they carry our pride or our downfall? That choice lies in how and why we create. Nogrod eventually fell, and its halls faded into memory. But the tension between glory and greed didn't end there. Because not all dwarves were welcome among their kin, and those who lived in exile were about to write a chapter of their own. Drenched in silence and shadows, the petty dwarves, just the name carries a sting, doesn't it? They weren't called that because they were lesser in skill or mind, but because they were cast out, exiled from the greater dwarven houses. Misfits, wanderers, the forgotten ones. They settled in secret places, carving crude halls, far from the grand cities of their kin. But isolation breeds bitterness, and bitterness left unchecked becomes something far more dangerous: resentment. These dwarves didn't just fall through the cracks of Middle-earth. They were pushed, they were hunted by elves, misunderstood and mistaken for animals in the early days of Middle-earth. You can feel the weight of that injustice. Imagine being brilliant, but dismissed, valuable, yet unseen. It happens more often than we think, even today. The kid in school called difficult because he asks too many questions, the visionary sidelined at work because she doesn't play by the rules. The story of the petty dwarves is a mirror for every underdog who was overlooked before they were understood. Mim, the last of their kind, shows up in one of Tolkien's darkest tales, The Children of Húrin. He appears frail, secretive, tragic, and deeply conflicted. He shelters Túrin, even helps him, but later betrays him, not because he's evil, but because the wounds of exile don't always heal with time. When you're rejected for long enough, even kindness feels dangerous. That's what makes Mim so painfully human. He's not a villain. He's a scar walking in the shape of a dwarf. Interestingly, Mim also crossed paths with Finrod Felagund, one of the noblest elves, and despite their differences, for a time there was a sliver of understanding, just enough to remind us that empathy can grow even in the harshest soil, but it takes courage to extend it and greater courage to accept it. If you've ever tried to reconcile with someone who hurt you, or worse, someone you hurt, you'll know what that dance feels. Like the petty dwarves faded into legend, their name reduced to whispers in ruined halls, but the idea of exile, of being cut off from your people, that would resurface again, just further east, where the lesser-known houses of the dwarves carried their own quiet burdens, waiting to be heard. If the dwarves of the West were legends sung by elves and recorded in books, the Eastern dwarves were more like rumors carried on the wind. The Iron Fists, Stiffbeards, Blacklocks and Stonefoots, names that sound more like mountain echoes than history. They hailed from the vast and mysterious lands of Rhûn, far from the eyes of men and elves. Tolkien gave us only fragments about them, but in those fragments, a quiet intensity. A reminder that just because a story isn't told doesn't mean It wasn't lived. These dwarves were survivors in the purest sense. Far from Khazad-dûm, beyond the reach of Eregion or Erebor, they held the line against dark forces we barely understand. Some resisted Sauron's temptations, others perhaps didn't. That's the thing about distance. It can protect you or isolate you. In life too, we often admire those in the spotlight while forgetting that in some far corner, someone is holding the world together without applause. There are whispers that a few Eastern dwarves fell under evil influence. That's uncomfortable, sure, but real. Even the children of Aula weren't immune to corruption. Power distorts when it meets desperation. Think of modern leaders who started with noble missions but twisted them along the way, or individuals who compromise their values just to feel seen. The Eastern clans remind us morality isn't inherited, it's chosen, one decision at a time. And yet, in the little we do know, there's something admirable. These dwarves endured without fanfare. Their stories weren't sung in Rivendell or celebrated in Gondor, but they carved their place into Middle-earth nonetheless. That's legacy in its rawest form, quiet but unshakable. Like those unsung. Pioneers, builders and protectors in our world who never make headlines, but without them, everything would crumble. Eventually, hints of the East would bleed into the West, through trade, through war, through whispered tales. And in one rare moment of unity, dwarves of every house, East and West, would rise together, hammer in hand, to fight a common foe. Because when your people are threatened, even ancient grudges can be put aside. You wouldn't think it, right? Dwarves and elves, two races as different as stone and starlight, standing side by side. But that's exactly what happened in Eregion during the Second Age. It was here that Celebrimbor, elven lord of craft, and Narvi, a master dwarf of Khazad-dûm, built not just doors, but trust. The doors of Durin, inscribed in Elvish, yet forged with dwarven skill, became a symbol of rare harmony. It's a reminder. Collaboration doesn't mean sameness. It means shared vision. This was a golden age. Elves and dwarves exchanged secrets, techniques and songs. Imagine the possibilities when two master artisans share a workbench, wood meeting metal, poetry meeting precision. Real-world example. Think Da Vinci collaborating with Tesla. Sounds unreal, right? But that's what Eregion was. A creative explosion born from mutual respect, even if their cultures didn't always see eye to eye. Magic and machinery found common ground. But don't be fooled. This alliance wasn't always smooth. There were misunderstandings, tensions, even rivalries. Elves saw time like wind, fleeting and sacred. Dwarves saw it like stone, measured and earned. But that's what made their union so powerful. When you build a bridge across difference, the foundation has to be stronger. In any relationship, business, personal or creative, that's the key. Not avoiding conflict, but learning to stand firm through it. Narvi's bond with Celebrimbor stands out because it was personal. They weren't just allies, they were friends. And in a world where alliances were often transactional, that friendship created something that lasted long after both were gone. Those doors outlived kingdoms. That's legacy. In your own journey, ask yourself, what are you building that will still be standing when your name is just a whisper? Of course, such beauty rarely goes unchallenged. While trust was being forged in Eregion, darkness was creeping in, disguised, charming and deadly, because sometimes the greatest threat isn't war. It's a gift wrapped in gold and whispered promises. When Sauron came to Eregion disguised as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, he didn't arrive with an army. He brought ideas, suggestions, whispered dreams of glory and perfection, and like any skilled manipulator, he knew his audience. To the dwarves, he offered what seemed like respect, power shaped into rings, 7 in total, each meant for a dwarf lord. They accepted them, not out of foolishness, but from a desire to protect and preserve their realms. After all, Who wouldn't? Grasp a tool that promises more control. But the rings were not what they seemed. Unlike men, the dwarves did not become wraiths. Their will was too stubborn, too anchored in stone. Still, the rings amplified their worst instincts, especially greed. Hordes grew, and with them, paranoia. What once was pride became obsession. In the real world, we see this in business all the time. Ambition turns into burnout, abundance becomes a burden, and people guard what they've built instead of growing. From it, these ring-bearers didn't seek power to dominate others. They wanted to secure what was theirs. But the moment your focus shifts from creating value to defending possessions, the decay begins. That's what Sauron exploited. He didn't need to control the dwarves directly. He just needed to corrupt their desire. It's a lesson for anyone chasing success. Ask yourself whether you're building from inspiration or from fear of losing what you've earned. Eventually, the rings drew dragons, literally. Creatures like Smaug didn't just stumble into treasure, something pulled them in. Where greed festers, ruin follows. The great dwarven halls, Erebor among them, became battlegrounds of fire and gold. Some dwarves survived, others vanished. But the rings left scars on every house. And once again, it was not swords or spells that caused the deepest wounds, but desire unbalanced by wisdom. And yet when the ashes settled and the dragons slept on stolen gold, the dwarves remembered something far older than any ring. Brotherhood, blood, firelight echoing in the deep. And when the time came, they rose, not as isolated clans, but as a united storm. There's a silence in the mountains before a dwarven war, an eerie stillness, like the world holding its breath. That's what came before the war of the dwarves and orcs. It wasn't about conquest, it was about vengeance. When Azog, the Defiler, killed King Thror and branded his name into the fallen king's head, he didn't just murder a dwarf, he awakened an ancient fire. Across Middle-earth, horns sounded, and for the first time in centuries, all 7 houses of the dwarves marched as one. They came from the Blue Mountains, from the east, from the Grey Hills, and the Iron Fist's shadowed halls. It didn't matter if they spoke different dialects or followed different customs. In that moment, they were dwarves first, fathers, brothers, warriors. The Battle of Azanul-Bizar beneath the gates of Moria was brutal. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't glorious. It was raw, axe against fang, flesh against fury. Thousands died, but Azog fell, and with him, the illusion that the dwarves were broken or scattered. Still, victory came at a cost. The dwarves could have pursued the orcs into the darkness, but they didn't. They were tired, weary, not just of battle, but of the weight of what it means to carry vengeance for too long. That's something every person should understand. Even a righteous cause, when dragged too far, becomes a burden. Knowing when to stop is its own form of strength. That's true in war, in business, and in life. Yet this war lit something that hadn't burned in ages: unity. The dwarves remembered who they were, that they weren't just craftsmen or hoarders. They were a people, a nation carved from stone and story. And that unity would ripple into later ages, guiding sons like Glóin and grandsons like Gimli. They would carry the fire forward, not just for gold, but for kin. That's legacy in motion, when your courage becomes someone else's foundation. And just as the echoes of that great war faded into the stone, whispers began to stir. Whispers of a return, of a name reborn. Because some say, Durin, the Deathless, himself would walk the mountains again. They called him Durin the Deathless, not just because he lived long, but because his soul, they said, would return. Again and again, and whether it was myth or miracle, the dwarves believed it. You see, for them, legacy wasn't just memory, it was rebirth. From Durin I to Durin VI and finally Durin VII, they didn't just carry his name, they carried his spirit. That belief gave them hope through collapse, exile, even dragonfire. and hope, as we know, is the rarest ore in all of Middle-earth. Durin 7, prophesied to return, finally rose during the Fourth Age, and with him came something no dwarf had dared dream for centuries, the reclamation of Khazad-dûm. After darkness, silence, and Balrog shadows, the halls rang once more with the sound of hammers and dwarven song. It's like reviving a lost language, or rebuilding a city after generations. Painful, messy, but oh, so worth it. Restoration isn't just about stone, it's about remembering who you are. And then there's Gimli, son of Gloin, friend of Legolas, survivor of the Fellowship. A dwarf who bridged worlds, literally and symbolically. He founded a new dwarven realm in the glittering caves of Aglarond, a place of unmatched beauty and wonder. Think about that. While others sought gold and revenge, Gimli chose wonder. He carved a future from awe. It's a modern lesson in reinvention. Your greatest contribution might come not from tradition, but from seeing the world with fresh eyes. Gimli's story also proved something powerful. Legacy isn't chained to the past. It evolves. His friendship with Legolas, once unthinkable, redefined the relationship between dwarves and elves. One act of brotherhood undid centuries of mistrust. In your own life, think about the bridges you could build between generations, cultures, even industries. All it takes is one person willing to try. So the story of the dwarves doesn't end in stone. It continues in echo, in blood, in boldness. From the first breath beneath Gundabad to the final hammer strike in the glittering caves, they remind us, you may be born in the dark, but you're meant to shine. And now, let's take a step back, because it's time to unveil the full story from the beginning. And now that you've journeyed through stone halls, dragon hordes, ancient grudges, and unbreakable brotherhoods, ask yourself, what kind of legacy are you building? The dwarves of Middle-earth didn't just carve mountains, they carved meaning. Through fire and exile, they taught us that resilience isn't loud, that true craftsmanship doesn't seek applause, it seeks purpose. And that even if the world forgets your name, your work can still echo for ages. So here's the challenge. What are you creating that's built to last? Are you chasing gold or forging value? Are you guarding the past or building the future? If this story stirred something in you, then don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join us on this journey through the hidden layers of Tolkien's world and maybe your own. Because if the dwarves taught us anything, it's that there's power in digging deeper.